What are the best games on every Nintendo home console? That's a question that I've thought about recently, and in this video I'm going to answer that question with some games that I think are truly exceptional. Today we're going to be going over the first 4 Nintendo consoles. In a couple weeks a part 2 will be released where we go over the rest, and if there's a game that I forgot to mention or you think deserves to be in this video, make sure to leave a comment giving your thoughts. With that all out of the way, let's begin by talking about the first console in this list, the NES. The Nintendo Entertainment System is home to over 700 different games, and of those games, around 3 of them are actually good. The standouts for this console are pretty obvious, and one of them is the original Super Mario Bros. This is one of the most recognizable games of all time, and even beyond that, it's still pretty fun even today. Super Mario Bros. Is a punishing game. If you lose all of your lives, all of your progress just disappears. What makes this easy to look past is the fact that the difficulty balancing in this game is so much better than basically every other game from its time. Most NES and arcade games are torture to go back to since they kill the player constantly for no reason and call it fun, so when you get to play a game like Super Mario Bros, which is actually fair and interesting, it's much easier to appreciate. This is a great game. There's really not much more to say than that because since it's so old, it's very simple. You go from left to right, but its impact on the video games industry as a whole can't be understated. The next game I would consider one of the best games on the NES is the original Excitebike. I feel like there are 5 people who have actually played this game, and everyone else knows it as the game with a Mario Kart course. Excitebike is a very simple racing game, but for how simple it is, the replay value is very good. You could easily sink hours into this game trying to perfect the mechanics or racing the computers. There's also an option where you can create your own courses. This feature is not the best in practice, obviously, since it was so limited, but it's still crazy that the developers of Excitebike were able to make something like this such a long time ago. If you want a great racing experience in a game, this probably won't be your first choice in the modern day. For an NES game though, it's pretty much the best it gets. Like I said earlier, there aren't a lot of amazing NES games, so there's only one more that I think is really worth talking about, Super Mario Bros. 3. This is personally my favorite NES game by far. Everything that made the original Super Mario Bros. Fun is back, along with a million new improvements and ideas. Simple additions like toad houses, more unique world themes, and airship levels make this game way more fun to go back to than the original game, or any NES game for that matter. On top of all the new additions, the soundtrack is incredible in this game, and the level design is far better than every game that was released up to that point. This may not be my favorite Mario game, or even one of my favorites, but whenever I think of a good retro experience, this is what comes to mind. There aren't many NES games that I think are that fun to go back to today if I'm being completely honest, so let's talk about one of Nintendo's best consoles next, the SNES. The quality of video games was rapidly getting better around the 1990s, and that was very obvious with how great games on the NES were compared to its predecessor. There are so many incredible titles on this system, so it's difficult for me to even think of one to start with, but one of the games that stands out to me the most is Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country is beloved for many reasons, but the biggest one is obviously the soundtrack. To this day, the music in this game is some of the most beautiful and well-made in gaming history. Nearly every song stands out, whether it's fun and energetic or ambient and peaceful. One man named David Wise was able to single-handedly carry this game with his incredible composing skills. Let's not take away the credit from any of the other people who worked on the game though. The level design in Donkey Kong Country is very good, and the graphics are incredible. One of my few complaints with this game is that the difficulty is sort of all over the place. A lot of deaths don't feel very fair since the camera is so zoomed in. It's hard to tell when an enemy is coming to attack me if I can't even see the enemy. Small complaints aside though, this is a phenomenal game, one of my favorites from the SNES, and one of the most popular as well. Another one of the best SNES games is Kirby Superstar. Everybody hates on the Kirby games, but you have to remember that this game exists, and so does Kirby's Dream Course. The graphics are okay, pretty average for an SNES game, nothing impressive. The music is great, nothing special. It really is the gameplay that makes this game stand out so much. I'm not even really talking about the single player campaign. Yeah, that mode is still great, but it's the mini games that make this game stand out to me. Possibly the best multiplayer experience possible in an SNES game is playing the mini games in Superstar with a friend or family member. The different game modes are all simple yet so fun. This won't be a life-changing game or anything for most people, but even with that in mind, It's a great game. The next game to talk about is one that has actually changed a lot of people's lives, at least according to the people who have played it. Super Metroid. This is a very unique game. There isn't really anything else like it on the SNES. It's so serious and atmospheric, the narrative is actually pretty interesting, and the game focuses a whole lot on its puzzles. The best thing about Super Metroid is obviously the music. Yeah, there are only like 5 songs that play throughout the entire game, but all of them get stuck in your head pretty fast since they're so recognizable. The graphics in this game are also incredible. Personally, probably my favorite looking SNES graphics ever. Some areas in particular, like Brinstar, have such a unique aesthetic that makes the game stand out. Super Metroid is not a perfect game by any means. The combat is pretty bad and the controls are super frustrating, but everything else in the game totally makes up for it. If you want to see my thoughts on Super Metroid a little bit more, I did do a little review of the game about a month ago, and you can go and check that out if you want to. Anyway, moving on to the most iconic SNES game of all time, Super Mario World. This game sold incredibly well, by far the best-selling SNES game, and that's for good reason. It truly is one of the best games on the entire system. Level design took center stage in Super Mario World. I can't think of a single unfair moment or frustrating level that made me want to stop playing. The Super Cape is also a fantastic power-up, the best in the entire Mario series. All of the little bonuses and secrets you can find throughout the game with this ability make every level feel completely fleshed out. Unlike pretty much every other platformer, there's a big layer of exploration in Super Mario World. I feel like every time I enter a level, there could be some secret that I haven't discovered yet, or really anything else. The feel of the game is also so much smoother than the games that came before it. Everyone who's played the original Mario and then Mario World knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's something a lot better about the movement in Super Mario World, which is probably related to the hardware, but it's still a good thing. The soundtrack and the art style for this game is just the icing on the cake. Everything about this game feels completely unique, and even to this day, it is the best 2D Mario game of all time. Switching focus from the best 2D Mario game, let's talk about the best 2D Zelda game, which is also on the SNES, A Link to the Past. This game is simply incredible. It's one of the best looking SNES games by far. The graphics may be more simple than a lot of other games on the system, but they nailed exactly what they were going for. The music is also great. Not only are there over 20 songs, which is much more than a lot of other SNES games, but nearly every single one of them is perfect as well. This game captures the feeling of adventure in a way that pretty much no other game around that time does. The size of the world and the amount of stuff you can explore is still on par with a lot of games being made today. The dungeons are also incredibly designed, the boss fights are some of the best in the Zelda series, and the story is told very well. It's not my favorite SNES game, it's not my favorite Zelda game either, but it is undoubtedly one of the best. We've talked about a whole lot of SNES games, but that's because the console simply has such a perfect library. There are a lot of other games on the console that are fantastic and I would like to talk about. I just can't spend the entire video talking about the SNES. In order to move on fast enough without explaining anymore, I'm just gonna say this and leave it at that. The best SNES game is Donkey Kong Country 2. Now we're gonna be talking about the Nintendo 64, when gaming went 3D. What are the best games for this console? Well, let's start with a classic, Super Mario 64. This is one of the most groundbreaking games of all time. The untapped freedom and creativity and movement and the way you can explore the world is still impressive even today. The ability to choose what worlds you want to explore in pretty much any order is brilliant. If you ever find a level or a challenge you don't find particularly fun, you can just skip it, and that's that. The controls are really weird to come back to today, especially when it comes to the camera, but it's incredible just how many tricks and shortcuts you can take advantage of in this game. Everything feels so precise and never feels slippery or like the player is out of control when it comes to this game's movement. Once you get the hang of movement in Super Mario 64, nearly everything else feels slow and unresponsive in comparison. The levels are all designed to motivate the player to experiment with their options, and it achieves that goal perfectly. The most fun thing to do in Super Mario 64 is to simply mess around with the great movement. This is one of the greatest N64 games ever, and arguably one of the greatest games of all time in general. Another one of the best N64 games is a lot more laid back, Pokemon Snap. This is not a turn-based RPG like all of the other Pokemon games, and funnily enough, It's my favorite Pokemon game. The gameplay loop is so simple. You take pictures of Pokemon, and the better the picture, the more points you get. The game gets a little more complicated as you make progress, yeah, but it always maintains that simple feeling. This is the kind of game you play at the end of a long day just to relax. Looking at all the different Pokemon and trying to get the best picture may not sound great in concept. The good news is that it was handled perfectly in the execution. You may not be able to freely roam around every area like in most games today, but you're constantly exploring new territory. The different areas are always satisfying to unlock and then go through. This game is a pretty small commitment because it isn't very long, it's simple, and it's easy to remember, but it's nice to have a game like that to play every once in a while. This is truly one of the most unique games out there, especially for its time, and I would recommend that anybody who hasn't played it, give it a try. The next game worth mentioning is yet another Mario game, Paper Mario. This game is such an outlier for its genre because unlike every other game with turn-based combat, Paper Mario is actually pretty fun. This is because every character actually feels unique. They all have pretty interesting personalities and their skill sets aren't interchangeable at all. I really like how they implemented using different characters outside of just the combat. Using Cooper to hit a block in the overworld rarely ever does anything, but it's still pretty cool. Because Paper Mario is a somewhat 2D game, the graphics look way better than most N64 games. When looking at a game like Super Mario 64, you can appreciate the gameplay and the music, but I don't think anybody is going to argue that that game looks beautiful. Paper Mario, on the other hand, is truly a great looking game. A world this unique and immersive, paired with these great characters and a fantastic soundtrack, and then the great graphics on top, makes a truly special game. Everybody talks about the Thousand Year Door as the true masterpiece of the series, but personally, I got sucked into the original Paper Mario much faster. The last N64 game to talk about in this video is the obvious one to point out, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. If video games had a main character, it would probably be Minecraft, but this game is a pretty close second. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime kind of games that actually got basically everything right. The soundtrack is unique and beautiful, the narrative is great, the gameplay and dungeons feel absurdly polished, and the world is fleshed out and fun to explore. Talking about why Ocarina of Time is great is like arguing that the grass is green. Everybody already knows it. It's just so impressive that this was the first 3D Zelda game, and to this day, nothing in the series has topped it. Yeah, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are great games too, don't get me wrong. But come on. If you have not played Ocarina of Time yet, play it. Moving on to the last console we're going to be covering today, the Nintendo Gamecube. This has one of the most impressive first-party libraries of any Nintendo console. It's one of my favorites, so let's start by talking about the best Smash game and one of the best Gamecube games as well, Super Smash Bros. Melee. This game has stood the test of time incredibly well. The controls feel weird at first, obviously, but that's because the game is so much more precise and fast than any other Smash game. Once you get the hang of tech like dash dancing, L-canceling, and wave dashing, the game becomes possibly the most enjoyable competitive game ever. Melee is also very balanced, allowing people of all different playstyles to enjoy the game. You can play someone like Fox or Sheik and constantly put pressure on the opponent, or you could play Jigglypuff. The process it takes to play Melee online today is very tedious and probably illegal, but it's completely worth it. I realize I sound like I'm a tryhard or something who loves this game completely, and I do want to mention that I've only played Melee myself for around 20 hours. Within that time, I've just had an amazing experience that I think most people will also enjoy. It's no surprise that this has the best legacy in fighting game history. It might not be worth getting into if you're a completely casual player, of course, but the game itself is truly exceptional. Another one of the best games on the GameCube is the original Luigi's Mansion. This game is a very interesting one, taking a mascot like Luigi and putting him into a dark and haunted manor where his goal is to survive ghosts and make it to the top floor is an idea that I never would really think of. With that being said, the strange premise is actually executed greatly. This game is not dark or scary, and it isn't super lighthearted either. Every now and then there will be a glimpse of optimism, but most of the game is actually very mysterious. You never know what you're gonna see next. On the surface, this game may not look that clever, but some of the puzzles are actually pretty good, like when this ghost is doing her makeup, so you have to pull off the curtains, which blows wind in her face and then allows you to attack her. Luigi's Mansion, at its core, is just a really good puzzle game with a few funny moments here and there. It's a must-play for anybody looking for a good GameCube game, and that's that. Once again, we're going to be covering a Zelda game in this video for like the third time because one of the best games on the entire GameCube is The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess is an incredibly epic and high-stakes game. It really leaned into that grand medieval sort of aesthetic, and it definitely paid off. Riding your horse through Hyrule Field, the final battle with Ganon, the conclusion of the city in the sky. Very few games are able to capture moments as amazing and beautiful as these. This is all just scratching the surface, of course. Twilight Princess isn't quite as good as Ocarina of Time since it has a few pacing issues and it's not very innovative. Regardless though, it's an incredible game and one of the best in the Zelda series. Last but not least is what I would consider to be the best GameCube game ever. Pikmin 2. In order to properly understand why Pikmin 2 is so good, we gotta talk about Pikmin 1 first, so here is the quick rundown. The original Pikmin is a great game. The music is some of the most unique in any video game, the narrative is surprisingly touching, and it looks better than most GameCube games. The problem with Pikmin is that the gameplay itself is often very frustrating. The game is all about commanding an army of Pikmin, which is a fantastic idea, but instead of actually listening to your commands and inputs, the Pikmin just kinda do whatever they want. Sometimes they'll lock onto an enemy properly, and other times they'll just walk into water and kill themselves. Pikmin had potential to be a complete masterpiece. The gameplay was just far too flawed for that to be the case. Now, I don't know if you've heard about this before, but there was actually a sequel to this game called Pikmin 2, and what that game did is get rid of everything I just complained about. All the great stuff about the original Pikmin was still there in Pikmin 2, except all of the small gameplay issues were polished up. I actually feel like I'm in control whenever I'm running around with my army. The combat is far more advanced and fair, and the progression system is decently better. On top of this, the world in Pikmin 2 is slightly improved with more fleshed out and visually impressive areas. The stressful time limit from the first game was also taken out of the equation, so you don't have to worry all the time while you're playing the game. Sometimes you can just take a step back, relax, and farm some Pikmin, which is what I really wanted to do in the first game, I just couldn't. This is my favorite GameCube game by a pretty big margin if I'm being honest, and if you have the means, you should definitely check it out. Wow, that's the end of the list. We talked about a lot more games than I thought we would. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe to see the part 2 coming out soon. I hope to see you there. And yeah, click on one of these videos. Bye-bye.